Welcome to the monthly presentation of the Institute for Historical Study. Today's presentation is by Dr. Brovarney. We'll be talking about Mendocino Refuge, the world apart and a part of the world. And she published a book called Mendocino Refuge, Leonard Reeves Canyon, which is about the people, plants, and animals who inhabited the area Reeves Canyon on the north coast. And she'll be talking about that book and some of the things that she learned while writing it. And Dot, who lives now in Mendocino, is a historian and author who is a professional museum curator and has written other books besides this one on Indian art, Native American art, and culture. So one other thing I want to mention is that anybody who wants to do a monthly presentation, please let me know. I have September open and most of 2025. Without further ado, Dot, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dan. I'm really excited to share some pieces of my book with you today. I'll introduce you to a couple of tough, hardy women that I discovered in the canyon's history, and you'll meet two Northern Pomo men. Each has a fascinating history, and you'll get a good look at inland Mendocino County's natural world. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now, if I can remember how to do that. Here we are. Okay. Everybody can see that, I presume. Can you hear me?
We can all hear you.
Okay, terrific. I chose the title A World Apart and Part of the World because having lived in Mendocino County for 35 years and done a lot of historical research over that period of time, I have gotten still living here, I have the sense sometimes of being very isolated. But in doing my research, what I've found is many connections between this rural place and the larger world, including within California history and Western American history. So I hope to give you an intimate sense today of Mendocino County, but also illuminate some of those connections. I first learned about Lake Leonard in 1990 when I was hired as the curator at the Grace Hudson Museum in Ukiah. And here she is floating languorously on this beautiful, placid lake. I assumed she was on vacation in the Sierra. Well, my director quickly disabused me of that and said, oh no, that lake is about 12 miles up the road northwest from here. Well, I found that to be just absolutely unbelievable, but it is true. The lake is at the top of a redwood fir canyon. It's 3/4 of a mile long, 1/2 mile wide, and 50 feet deep. And also, importantly, it is still surrounded by old growth redwood and Douglas fir. Grace Hudson is well known for her Pomo paintings. These are the people she grew up around in the latter part of the 19th century. But she also, excuse me, she also had a special access to this privately owned lake due to her relationship with this man, John Leonard. He is the gray-bearded man in the front row that you see there. Her grand uncle homesteaded the lake in 1874. So I thought I would put a map up to help with orientation. If you look at the map on the left, just a couple of things to note. You can see the location of Lake Leonard up toward the top. It's in the western upper Russian River watershed. And just quickly go ahead and follow that Russian River down. You can see it follows 101, known as the Redwood Highway, into Sonoma County and eventually into the Pacific Ocean. Looking at the more focused map here, which was done in beautiful watercolor by one of the artists that is associated with my designer, I wanted to just point out several things on here for you to note. Obviously, you can see the lake there. It is part, as you can see, of the Russian River watershed, but it is nestled up so close to the western ridge there that if you were to hike up from the lake and over the ridge, you would be in the Big River watershed, which of course, Big River, many of you know, is the one that empties just south of Mendocino town on the coast. The other thing I wanted to point out with you is let's follow the creek that comes out of the lake and it heads north. And note to the left, there's a four-pronged, what I'll call a fork there. Those are streams that are headwaters of Big River. And then at the same time, let's follow along and you can see how Mill Creek makes a large arc as it heads east, southeast. So one of the key characters in my book is this woman, 𝘞𝘰𝘳𝘠𝘮. Her parents bought the lake in 1885, and she was born 5 years later in 1890. Because she spent a lifetime at the lake, neighbors and friends gave her the title, the Lady of the Lake. Another key woman who here is obviously quite a young girl is Hazel Dickinson. And I chose, based on the model of Una, to call this woman the Lady of the Canyon. Now, this woman I owe a lot to because it is her trunk that came to my attention back in 2014 that became the seed for this book. It was overflowing with photographs of the canyon, the old growth redwoods, the fir, the lake. It was just overwhelming. And since I had long been fascinated with the canyon and the lake, it seemed natural for me to consider a book. I'm going to take a sip of water, excuse me. So in 2014, when I started, I was not the only person who had a special interest in this lake. There was a paleoecologist from the USGS named Lysana Anderson, who that very same year had found this near to pristine lake and begun bringing her team up to do climate studies. So I like to say this is not chocolate fudge or anything else. This is actually a soil sample that was cored from beneath the bottom of the lake. And some of the photos, I think, block it out, but you can see a divot, piece of this has been removed. And that was what was used in the pollen studies. And the research is ongoing, but to date, the lake has been determined to be at least 3,500 years old. Now, in this shot, you are looking at a bunch of earth that actually moved. So the lake was a spring-fed creek until a landslide came down from the right-hand side there, such that these historic houses are actually built onto the slide. And, you know, the other clue to the landslide is you're actually seeing on the left of the shoreline there, the very tops of some of the boulders that came crashing down. I'd like to turn now to the original people that lived in this territory, the Pomo people. We're going to talk today about Charlie Bowen and Stephen Knight. Quite a contrast. Charlie Bowen was a 19th century traditional Pomo, and Stephen Knight was a 20th century man, Pomo man, and truly a part of the world. And I put Annie Burke on this slide because just the power that emanates from her face is just remarkable. And I also wanted you to get a peek at the superlative Pomo basketry. I'd like to read a poem called Grandmother's Land by William Owandison. And Owandison was not Pomo, he was of the 𝘗𝘰𝘳𝘠𝘬, and that is a tribe nearby the Pomo to the north. Grandmother's Land. Around the house stood an orchard of plum, apple, and pear, a black walnut tree, one white pine, groves of white oak and willow clumps. The home of Jessie was largely redwood. Blood, flesh, and bone sprouted inside her womb of redwood for 5 generations. The trees now stand unpruned and wild. After relocating so many years before the war, the seeds of Jessie have returned. Afternoon sunlight on the field, breezes moving grass and leaves, memories with family names wait within the earth, the mountains, the valley, the field, the trees. Well, I began my early archival research with Sam Barrett for 3 reasons. He was a local boy. He grew up in the town of 𝘗𝘁, which is rather close to Reeves Canyon. He also happened to be the very first PhD graduate in Alfred Kroeber's anthropology program. And this was 1908. And the third thing is he created a most informative and intriguing map that we'll look at now. The map on the left, primarily, all you need to know is that the pink area was the Pomo people's traditional territory. And then if you look above there, you can see the poets' ancestral lands in the green, the 𝘗𝘰𝘳𝘠𝘬. And looking at the enlargement here, what I thought we could do is start in Ukiah at the bottom and follow the Russian River north. And you can see 𝘗𝘁, where Barrett was raised. And let's follow that north and head west on Forsyth Creek. And there you see 2 old villages of the Massout tribe. And this area we're talking about today, Reeves Canyon, Lake Leonard, was the Massout territory. And let's continue up Forsyth and take the Mill Creek branch. And as you follow this creek up, you are now in Reeves Canyon. And here is another old Pomo site. And continue going further northwest. The X is an old campsite. And then Mill Creek just drifts off into nowhere. So since we've looked at the other map, and I did point out to you that arc, you can see on this map that the lake is absolutely missing from the map, which, you know, is a bit of a puzzler and a bit of a mystery. And I feel like through my research, I have some notion of what might have happened. But in any case, remember the 4-pronged fork. If you look at the map here, he has 3 prongs. Those are those big river streams. And the lake would basically be, well, I'd say almost directly under the X or the O there above and about the level of that center stream. So I decided to turn to a native source at this point, and I chose the man who's seated here, Charlie Bowen, who was born in 1850. I had run into Charlie, oh gosh, about 20 years ago, doing a different research project. And I knew that he had served as a consultant to many anthropologists and felt that he would be a good possibility. The other point in his favor is that as a youth, he worked as a laborer for a rancher in the valley you see behind him here, Walker Valley. And Walker Valley, in fact, is so extensive it actually fronts Mill Creek at the at the lower end of the canyon. So Walker Valley is actually quite close to the lake. At age 10, Charlie was chosen by a maternal uncle to play a powerful and sacred role in his community, that of the singing doctor. His uncle spent years training him in the healing arts, and when he felt Charlie was ready, Charlie was able to take an oath honoring the rules of his profession. And Stephen Knight, the other gentleman you're going to meet, said this about the singing doctors. They came from way back yonder with creation. This power was passed down through the family. This was learned. It was a real profession. I wanted to give you a sense of both the singing doctor's role and appearance. And so this Grace Hudson painting does do that. There's a story from Coyote that I'm going to quote. Go out and hunt, but do not go near the brush because it is a dangerous place. I have put bears in there,
Mendocino.
and they will bite you. You must also be careful to not go near holes in the rocks. I put rattlesnakes in there, and they will bite you. He also told his people how to cure these bites. He said, I am going to show you another thing. When you get hurt, when you get sick, you must sing. One of you must be a doctor and must sing over those who are ill. Coyote then made for the dancers and doctors feathers and other paraphernalia. So in effect, the message here from Coyote, and this would be, of course, an ancient story passed down in Native oral history. In effect, these are admonitions, Coyote's identifying taboos as a way to guide behavior. And it's a little more subtle, but it is really associating the breaking of taboos with sickness. And he's also offering the solution or the cure to sickness through the use of singing doctors. So singing doctors had their own rules. They had special access to places deemed supernatural. So those were places like close to the earth, like caves or lakes, or conversely, near the upper world, like mountain peaks. So these were places that were not accessible to, in general, to villagers. In these places, the doctor would go to gather healing materials, plants, special plants, animal matter, stones, and feathers. And these would all be placed in his medicine sack, and he would return to the village. Leonard Lake, or Lake Leonard as I prefer to call it, would have been a place with hidden power reserved for doctors. Charlie Bowen never mentioned it in all the research I did, and I do feel like I exhausted the archives, many of them. In any case, had he talked about this powerful place, he may have broken part of his oath. And the consequences for that was that a doctor himself could become sick, or worse yet, lose his power to heal. I'm going to shift gears a little bit here and introduce the American government and their entry into Pomo country. The stereograph you're looking at is of Clear Lake, and it was at the southern end of the lake in Kelseyville in 1850, where two ranchers who were well-known Indian abusers had been murdered. And so at this point, the U.S. Army marched into Pomo country. And for some reason, which is, it remains unclear as far as I can tell, they marched around the lake to the opposite end from Kelseyville and massacred the villagers of Upper Lake that lived at the north end. And from my research, I've learned that they had no apparent involvement in the Kelseyville situation. And the Army continued marching west, and actually there were some more murders as they got into the Ukiah Valley area. Some villagers got advance word that they were on their way and were able to flee down to Hopland, south of Ukiah, where they hid behind this mountain. Well, this Curtis photograph I chose because it really, to me, serves as a visual epitaph for the people that were killed in the Bloody Island massacre. The numbers range. There's no definite number of people killed among the Upper Lake villagers, but they range from a low of 60 up to 800. So the US government actually returned a year later in 1851 with a peace treaty in hand. Calpella Pete Smith, whom you see the elder gentleman here, his grandfather was the Massout chief, Chief Calpella. Chief Calpella was one of the signatories, along with 17 other California chiefs who agreed to leave their traditional land in exchange for protection from white vigilantes, which was an ongoing horrific problem, as well as accepting other provisions such as agricultural opportunities, access to education, and places where they would be able to hunt, fish, and gather. And as you probably are aware, Congress never did ratify any of these 18 treaties. So the subsequent idea the government came up with to manage this, excuse me, was to create a couple of reservations, both of which were in Mendocino County. The first one was in Fort Bragg in 1856, but it was soon replaced by this one in Round Valley in the northeastern part of Mendocino County in 1864. What I wanted to point out in this map is if you look at the bottom, there's kind of a lighter white area. I think you can see the word agency there. That, if you look in the enlargement, you'll see it in the upper left. I wanted you to see the very small area in which a number of different tribes were expected to coexist. And you can see a number of them scattered across this white space at the top. And many, some of these tribes were forced to live together who had actually been historic enemies. And, you know, this is 102,000 acres. And that really, you can see what a small portion that is that they are forced to live together in. And, you know, the abuses did not stop. They continued there. The surrounding ranchers used the reservation land for their own grazing. They stole government food stores. There were all kinds of horrible, unbelievable abuses, which I'm not going to detail here. I want to go back to Curtis just for a moment because these portraits are just so lovely. So the woman on the left is 𝘗𝘳𝘳𝘠, and that means she would have been from the Laytonville area north of Willits. And the gentleman on the right is 𝘠𝘬𝘳𝑚𝑦𝘬. And the 𝘠𝘬𝘳 were just one of a number of tribes that were force marched from the Sacramento Valley over to the reservation. Now, of course, these two would be too young to have been on the reservation originally, but I would be pretty convinced that their ancestors would have spent time there. We're just going to look at this map momentarily. What I wanted to note here is the relative difference in size of most of the Western reservations as compared to what you see in California. In terms of getting the federal government's attention, you can see that California tribes would have had quite the challenge being scattered this way. The X's are all rancherias. So what happened was, certainly in terms of the Pomo people in the area of inland Mendocino, they just got tired of the abuses over time, the fact that they never stopped, and they just left the reservation. And they returned, you know, to their familiar homelands. Some of them were able to return and work for ranchers they had worked for before. And they found ways to raise funds and purchase small acreages that then became rancherias and remain so today. Well, Stephen Knight was a 𝘗𝘢𝘳𝑃𝑜mo Pomo from Ukiah, and he was ready to take up the challenge of these broken treaties. He was a key leader of the California Indian delegation, and in 1922, in January, I believe, they went, a group of representatives of the larger group went to Washington, D.C., where they met with California Senator Hiram Johnson. They lobbied him, and in fact, they were successful, according to the New York Times, in getting the California delegation to support their effort for compensation for lost lands. However, the full Congress didn't see it that way. Nonetheless, the group, here are the Stephen in the middle with his cohorts that met with Johnson. They have decided to keep up the fight. They are attending the second annual conference of the California Indian Delegation in San Francisco later that year. And here's the a number of the conferees in the city. It would take 22 more years for California Indians to achieve any kind of redress. They were able, through a legal process, to get a favorable ruling of $17 million in 1944. But after the government deducted what it thought its costs were, the $17 million became $5 million. And once that was distributed among 136,000 surviving California Indians, each one got a paltry $150. Well, I'm happy to report that in the late 20th century and the early 21st century, dramatic changes have happened, particularly in the area of land reparations. In 1997, 10 tribes formed the intertribal 𝘗𝘰𝘳𝘨𝘰 wilderness, and this area is in northwest Mendocino County. And they had the first ever U.S. agreement between tribes and private land trusts. And now the 𝘗𝘰𝘳𝘨𝘰 group owns and manages over 4,500 acres in northwestern Mendocino County. In 2019, PG&E donated 800 acres of Eel River watershed to another Mendocino County group, the Potter Valley Tribe. And just this past week, the Berkeley City Council returned over 2 acres of former shell mound to a Native coalition in the Bay Area. So I'd like to get into the woods now with the two very different people with two very different experiences in the woods. Tapping Reeves was a 19th century man from another part of the world, upstate New York. Hazel Dickinson Putnam was herself born in Ukiah and was a 20th century woman who spent summers upon summers and finally retirement in the woods in her world apart. Tapping Reeves was a machinist who, like so many others, came west for gold. I presume he had little luck because by the 1850s, he was on the Mendocino coast seeking red gold. He worked for the Albion Mill in the late 1850s. And by 1864, he and a couple of partners had founded the Little River Mill just south of Mendocino. One of the reasons that there were so many mills on the Mendocino coast and so much logging was done here was there was easy access to ship lumber to growing communities and of course to San Francisco from the ports right here, which of course made it a surprise to me when I learned that Tapping Reeves bought a inland sawmill in Reeves Canyon in 1874. Somehow he made an inland mill work despite having no way to ship his lumber. and being limited to a local customer base. But he was a smart guy. He was entrepreneurial. He even had patented 2 inventions improving the operations in sawmills. So he was able to make a go of it. Now, Reeves Canyon, the creek floods in the winter and produces lots and lots of mud. So what this meant for Reeves was that he had to close the mill in the winter, and he, along, I assume, with his workers, had to find other jobs. Tapping Reeves took a job superintending a ditch project for a hydraulic mining plan. And this photo, I have to say, is not local. This is in the Sierra foothills. And this is how a reporter described the project when he toured it. A splendid piece of engineering. When the water is brought in, they will have a fall from 50 to 150 feet, enough to tear the mountain from its base. The whole enterprise is in the hands of a company in San Francisco who are furnishing the sinews of war. Now, this never came to much because unlike the Sierra foothills, what we have here is fool's gold. So it was not a profitable endeavor. But more changes were afoot, and from much further away than San Francisco. And I'm going to give you a second while I have some water to just take in this image, which is quite something. It's all there in this Currier and Ives print. A Boston mining company had a plan that's explained in great detail in an 1881 mining publication. Their goal, and I'm going to quote, was to open up as fine a body of virgin timber forest as there is in California, which every year will add to its value, as the redwood timber is fast disappearing, and its value will be more and more appreciated as the redwood becomes scarcer and more difficult to obtain. So this mining journal was really quite fascinating, and I found it online. You know, it's just another one of those lucky strikes. I'm going to show you, besides an extensive proposal, columns and columns of detail. This was also in there. And we can start up in the upper left corner, and you can see Lake Leonard there at the top, and you follow the creek down, and there is a head dam which was built, and a little bit lower than that you see Reeves Mill, misspelled, but we'll ignore that. And you can follow the flume along to 𝘗𝘁𝘓, which is in the bottom right corner. That is a 13-mile meandering flume with 6 tunnels that involved blasting through ridges within 4 different watersheds. All the landowners along the route, which of course in those days we were talking large acreages, so I don't have an exact count, but everyone sold out except one person, and the sellers included John Leonard and Tapping Reeves. And Reeves, no surprise, also took the job of overseeing his mill because of course they were needing lumber to build the flume. And I have a shot in here of a very active flume. This is from the Pacific Northwest. But the next slide I want to show you. This is the vision that I had when I saw this map and I read the description of what could have happened here. Now, of course, this is, you know, the coast, and it's a couple of decades later, and let's ignore the trains. But this is the picture that came to my mind. But luckily for us, the fish, the plants, and the wildlife, the capitalists failed to raise the necessary capital. So here's Hazel Putnam having a different experience of the woods. And I think you can see her family among their property's old growth here. And together they built a summer cabin on Mill Creek in 1904. And you remember little baby Hazel. So here she is on the far right. She's a little bit bigger, fishing in the creek with her two sisters. And I don't know if you can see it, but each of them is holding their catch. So here we have a bigger Hazel and a bigger fish. She's about 19 years old here. I think she's on the right in the left-hand photo. And then, of course, this is her with her shotgun and after the hunt. I think you can get the sense that she was becoming well adapted to life in the woods. And here she is with what I'm calling the requisite horse. She actually had more than one that country women commonly seem to collect. In 1920, she married Harry Putnam, who you can see here, standing on this magnificent old growth redwood on the property. The family called it the grandfather tree. And, you know, that tree is still there. I have stood under it myself. It's absolutely magnificent. Although I, saw it and said, oh, a grandmother tree. And I want you to have a look at this shot of Hazel, because I think it really conveys, the great respect she had for the woods. And of course, this is, the World War I period. So naturally, she's showing her respect with a salute. So she and Harry were married in 1920, and they lived in the East Bay and returned every summer to their cabin in the woods. Here they are in the upper photograph in the 1920s, and you see them 40 years later when they returned for good in 1960. So a friend of Hazel's was kind enough to write a poem about her for my book. I just want to read a short excerpt from it. This is titled Hazel by Kate Doherty. Her place was a sanctuary she honored and protected. She never spoke directly of this, but quietly walking the land with her, you knew it. Tenderness was the core of her legendary ferocity, igniting when strangers hunted or logged her land. You could say she owned that place, but it really was a love affair, and she loved her partner in countless mysterious ways. I really felt it was extraordinary to find two such strong, hardy females in this tiny crack of earth in the North Coast ranges. But, thinking about it, growing up in the woods, having that childhood experience, even just summers, exposed both Hazel and Una to the rugged outdoor life. And that is Una there with her pup, Blarney. But also look at the childhood idol. Here's Una in a hammock with her with a sister and a brother and a family friend. And I just love this shot here of the, I guess you could call it country jousting. But it wasn't all play and no work. Mrs. Boyle brought a tutor up, insisting that the children do their lessons. I have a suspicion that Mrs. Boyle may have had an ulterior motive so that she and her kids could stay at the lake which they were sometimes able to do into November with the tutor there. While the trunk was the window into Hazel for me, I also, through deep research and an extreme amount of luck, was able to find my way into Una's life. And in order to do that, I had to get to Washington State. That is where 200 pages of Una's letters to two friends, 𝘗𝘬𝘳𝘠 being one of them here, were, along with 7 of 𝘗's photo albums. 𝘗 had collected and saved the letters, and they'd been preserved by her nephew, who gave me access to all of it. And they gave me a picture into her life at the lake, both its beauty and its hardships. 𝘗, you see here on the left, described Una perfectly. She described her as barely 5 feet tall and looking like a tiny cowboy in her 10-gallon hats and chaps. Well, Una moved a lot faster than Hazel and chose an independent life at the lake in 1921 at the age of 30. But the challenges were rife to live there year-round. I mean, anybody who had property up there generally used it just in summers. What happened in the winter was the road became unnavigable. The creek flooded, giant trees fell, often blocking the road. Multiple bridges collapsed. Sometimes horses, cars, and people were stuck in the mud. But the beauty's undeniable. One of the things Una did was have her go at raising sheep, which was a huge challenge for her. And of course, she had the requisite horses. Despite lacking a college degree, Una had a keen interest in nature, and of course, she was in the right place to apply it. Her correspondence with 𝘗 and another friend, Ruth Storer, is filled with her observations and questions. 𝘗 was a bacteriologist with the U.S. Health Department, and Ruth herself was the first female doctor in Yolo County. And we're talking in both these cases about these achievements in the early 1920s. You know, it was these girls were growing up, were coming of age during this span of time connected to suffrage. So, you know, California women got the vote in 1911, followed by the federal vote in 1920. So I really think that you know, that really gave them a sense of ambition and strength. Una began some serious correspondence with Ruth's husband, Dr. Storer, who founded the zoology department at UC Davis in 1923. She even shipped Dr. Storer larvae of the giant salamander, which ended up informing his publication that you see here in 1925. And the Audubon Society of the Pacific published her list of 44 birds about Lake Leonard in 1923. And this is a chickadee. I can't remember the exact name. It's something to do with its back. I apologize. And a green heron below. Somebody may be able to, we must have a birder in the group that can identify that. So the person you see here is an old friend of Una's, Leo Lesser. He is rebuilding a cabin that Una and a couple of others, including him, brought up from a nearby canyon. And I just have to tell you that Leo actually meticulously numbered and labeled each piece, each board, so that he could accurately replicate this cabin, which he did. He was a thoracic surgeon, and he treated Frida Kahlo during Diego's mural work in San Francisco in 1931. And Leo and Frida became close friends and correspondents. Una hosted another guest of some renown in 1944. Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. came scouting the woods for the Save the Redwoods organization. There was no deal, but she was charmed. She wrote, "I liked him exceedingly, 74 years of age, and so spry that Caliph had to trot to walk with him." Una really had a frontline view, witness to the changes in the logging industry that came with mechanical, I guess we can call them advancements, in the 1940s. She wrote to be, "The slaughter of the poor trees. I really hate the destruction. Not only the trees wrecked, but the ground bulldozed to an extent of ruin. Not only the trees wrecked, but the ground, it would break your heart." So besides her moxie, a faith in Saint Anthony, her horses and other animals, Una coped with the challenges because she had a great sense of humor. I'd like to read a poem that she wrote that is really, really quite funny. It's called Reeves Canyon Washout. Straight from Reeves Canyon and wet to the skin, I accosted St. Peter and asked for my kin. I shivered and chattered and couldn't talk plain. Says he, "Go to hell, ma'am, I don't get your name." "Come in," says the devil, "you're traveling late. I've fished for you often and used horses for bait." Old neighbors nodded as in I strode. Say they foot or horseback, and how's the road? Streamlined, says I. I've been lost for a spell. Reeves Canyon landmarks, washed plumb to hell. But I should worry, this hot place suits. And I nodded to Satan to pull off my boots. After Una's death in 1952, her brother and sister sold the lake property to Dick and Susanna Dakin in 1953. The sale included an unusual agreement that the buyer protect the lake habitat forever. The Dakins embraced both the agreement and the place. I wanted to pair these two photographs just to show you the historical continuity over time. Here are the Boyle kids seated at the old growth redwood that is just up behind the lake in 1905. And then you see one of the Dakin grandchildren at the same spot in 1966. This is 3 generations of the Dakin family. They've honored their commitment now over 70 years. This shot was taken in case I didn't mention it, 1960. I wanted to point out 3 of the people in here right now, going from the left of the adults. The second person is Sue Dakin, and her brother to her left is Henry Dakin. Those are children of the original Dakins that you see there in the middle. Sue and Henry, and the little boy that you see seated at the left, Sam. they made a decision going beyond the original commitment. In 1998, they chose to place a conservation easement on not only the lake property, but additional properties that had been acquired. And these included land in the upper Russian watershed, and also over the ridge. And we're looking here now into the Big River watershed for a total of 4,000 acres, protection in perpetuity for wildlife corridors, for native plants, all important and essential steps in creating refuge so needed in our changing world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dot. And I'll open the floor to questions. I'd just like to start by asking, how easy is it nowadays to get to that lake?
Okay, good question. I had a feeling that was coming. So I'll tell you, it is not impossible. And this, I deal with this in my book. It's actually the last chapter before the conclusion. At a point in the 2000 teens, if I'm not mistaken, the family made a decision to open the lake up as a resort for visitors. So I don't know if you remember the houses sitting on the landslide. They are very large. So what I tend to tell people, and I'm not marketing the resort by any means, which is one of the reasons why I haven't mentioned it, but people do want to know how to get there and what's involved. So I say, if you have enough friends, you can certainly afford to go. Last I understood, there was a $400 fee for staying overnight in any of several houses, but the largest house, I think it sleeps something like 12 or 15 people. So you can go to Lake Leonard Reserve online and learn more about that. And it's a wonderful experience. I'd encourage everyone to go.
Yeah, I can't seem to unmute everybody, but anybody else who has questions, you can unmute yourselves.
What about the road to get there? What's that like?
Well, I'll tell you, I have made it up fine. And every time I do go, which is not terribly often, I do worry on some of the narrower parts that I have to try to remember, well, how are you supposed to back up? Who's supposed to back up if you run headlong into somebody? When you're on a hill, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I've lucked out and never had that happen, but it's very windy. It's a dirt road. You wouldn't want to do it in winter. You wouldn't want to do it in the rain, is my feeling. If I'm remembering correctly, I think from Highway 101, it really does take about 45 minutes to get to the lake. It's definitely not what you would call straight shot.
But it's worth the view.
Oh, it's totally worth it. Now, I mean, I would not recommend going up the road without having a reservation or some kind of prior arrangement, because there is a locked gate about a mile or two down the road from the lake.
But the family still maintains its commitment to conserve it.
Yes, they do. And that conservation easement was done through the Pacific Forest Trust, which was originally based in Boonville, another Mendocino County town. I believe they've moved now and become much larger, but yes.
Okay, anyone else?
Well, I wanted to make sure to mention, if you have further interest in the book, you can go to mendocinorefuge.com and you can find out how to get a copy. I'm only going through independent bookstores and museums, so don't even look at Amazon. It's my Jeff Bezos protest movement, protest movement of one. And there is a consignment arrangement at Pegasus on Solano in Berkeley, if anybody wants to go by there and pick one up. Thank you so much. I enjoyed spending the afternoon with you all.
Well, thank you again, and thank everybody for coming. This concludes the presentation. The YouTube, recording, which I'm going to stop in a moment, will be available on YouTube at some point shortly. And we hope that you will have a nice St. Patrick's Day.
Thank you.